The October air, crisp and carrying the scent of burnt gunpowder, hung heavy over the riverside shooting range. Kat pulled her nondescript sedan into a parking lot dominated by gleaming pickups and mud-splattered SUVs. A knot tightened in her stomach, a familiar sensation that had nothing to do with hunger and everything to do with the sea of testosterone that awaited her inside. She adjusted the baseball cap low over her eyes, a futile attempt to blend in. This was her third week at the advanced marksmanship class, and the feeling of being an outlier hadn't lessened. Just get in, practice, get out, she repeated internally, her mantra for these Tuesday mornings. Stepping out, the metallic tang of gun oil mingled with the crisp air. The rhythmic pop of gunfire echoed across the range, each shot a tiny explosion punctuating the quiet hum of the Sacramento River nearby. Kat retrieved her range bag from the trunk, its weight comforting and familiar. The worn canvas held more than just targets and ear protection. It carried years of memories, of a life she'd meticulously tucked away. She slung the bag over her shoulder, the familiar pressure grounding her. As she walked towards the range entrance, a group of men, clustered around a gleaming pickup, caught her eye. They were loud, their laughter booming across the parking lot. One, taller than the rest, with a swagger that screamed unearned confidence, gestured towards her with a mocking grin. Travis Sullivan. He was the range's self-proclaimed king, a peacock displaying his plumage of expensive firearms and tailored shooting gear. Well, look what the cat dragged in. Travis's voice dripped with condescension, loud enough for her to hear. A ripple of laughter followed from his entourage. Kat's jaw tightened, her grip on the range bag instinctively tightening. Ignore it, she told herself. Just focus on the target. But a flicker of annoyance, a spark of something hotter, flared beneath her carefully constructed composure. She kept her gaze forward, willing her steps to remain even, unhurried. Didn't know they started offering beginner classes on Tuesdays. Another voice chimed in, laced with sarcasm. Marcus, Travis's shadow, always eager to parrot his leader's sentiments. Kat's breath hitched, a sudden tightness in her chest. Beginner? The word echoed in her mind, a grating dissonance against the phantom weight of the sniper rifle she'd once carried with practiced ease. She pushed the memory down, locking it away in the vault where she kept the fragments of her past. Reaching the entrance, Kat nodded a curt greeting to Bill, the range officer. He was a weathered man, his face a roadmap of wrinkles etched by years of sun and wind. He returned her nod, his expression a mix of weary resignation and mild curiosity. He'd seen it all before: the posturing, the bravado, the inevitable humbling. Kat suspected he recognized a flicker of something different in her, a quiet confidence that belied her unassuming appearance. Or maybe she was just projecting. It was hard to tell anymore, the lines between her past and present so blurred. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of gunpowder and the metallic tang of spent casings. The rhythmic clang of metal on metal, the shouts of commands, the sharp crack of gunfire created a cacophony that usually settled her nerves. But today, the undercurrent of Travis's mockery grated on her, a persistent hum beneath the surface. She walked to her assigned lane, her movements precise and economical. As she set down her bag, she caught Travis's gaze in the reflection of the safety glass. His smirk was a challenge, an invitation to engage in a battle she had no intention of fighting. Not here, she thought, not today. She meticulously laid out her equipment: ear protection, eye protection, her Glock 17. Each item placed with the practiced ease of long familiar ritual. It was a grounding process, a way to reconnect with the part of herself she kept hidden. As she loaded the magazine, her movements were fluid, almost automatic. The weight of the gun in her hand felt right, an extension of her own body. She could feel Travis's eyes on her, his gaze heavy with a mixture of amusement and skepticism. He probably expected a fumbling display of inexperience, a confirmation of his preconceived notions. Kat closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath, letting the familiar weight of the gun settle in her hand. When she opened them, Her gaze was clear, focused. She raised the Glock, aligning the sights, her breath steady and even. Breathe in, breathe out, squeeze. The mantra from another lifetime echoed in her mind. 3 shots, rapid fire. 3 perfect hits, clustered tightly in the center of the target. The sound of the shots echoed through the range, followed by a stunned silence. Kat lowered the Glock, her expression unchanged. She felt a flicker of satisfaction, a quiet acknowledgement of her own skill. It wasn't about proving anything to Travis or anyone else. It was about maintaining her connection to a part of herself she couldn't deny, a part she both cherished and feared. She glanced at Travis. His smirk had vanished, replaced by an expression of stunned disbelief. Marcus, standing beside him, gaped openly, his eyes wide with awe. Even Bill, the jaded range officer, raised an eyebrow in impressed acknowledgement. The silence stretched, broken only by the quiet hum of the ventilation system. Kat turned back to her target, reloading the Glock with practiced ease. The knot in her stomach had loosened, replaced by a sense of quiet, unwavering calm. She was just there to shoot, to find her center in the familiar rhythm of gunfire. The rest, the posturing, the judgments, were just noise. The fluorescent lights of the Sacramento Valley shooting range buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow on the worn linoleum floor. Kat Torres, a woman who wore her 40-odd years with a quiet grace, stood before the check-in counter, her gaze fixed on the faded safety posters plastered on the wall behind it. A faint scent of gun oil and stale coffee hung in the air, a familiar aroma that tugged at a buried corner of her memory. "Focus, Kat," she told herself, her fingers tightening around the worn strap of her range bag. Just another day at the range. The range officer, a man named Bill whose face resembled a crumpled road map of wrinkles, eyed her with the weary disinterest of someone who had seen it all. He pushed a waiver across the counter, the ballpoint pen attached by a frayed chain rattling softly against the laminate. "First time here?" he asked, his voice raspy, like gravel rolling downhill. "Yes, sir," Kat replied, her voice even and calm. The echo of her own politeness, a learned behavior from years of blending in, resonated in her ears. She signed the waiver with a practiced hand, her signature a careful, nondescript scrawl, betraying nothing of the steady pulse beneath her skin. Bill glanced at her name tag, his eyes lingering for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. Probably sizing me up, she thought, a flicker of amusement dancing at the edges of her awareness. Wondering if I'm going to faint at the first shot. Across the room, Travis Sullivan, the range's self-proclaimed king, held court. He gestured with an exaggerated flourish, a gleaming Glock clutched in his hand. His voice, loud and confident, boomed across the room, punctuated by the occasional burst of laughter from his entourage. Kat recognized the type, the kind who mistook volume for expertise, swagger for skill. She'd met enough of them in her life to know better than to engage. Let him have his moment, she thought, her gaze drifting back to the safety posters. It's a small stage, after all. Travis's voice rose above the hum of the ventilation system. "See, the thing about precision shooting," he pronounced, his words dripping with self-importance, "it's not just about pulling the trigger. It's about control. Breathing, stance, grip, it's a symphony of movement, a dance between man and machine." He paused for dramatic effect, his eyes scanning the room, landing briefly on Kat. A condescending smirk tugged at the corners of his lips. "He's looking at me," Kat realized, a prickle of annoyance running down her spine. Does he think I need a lecture? The impulse to correct him, to dismantle his pretentious monologue with the cold, hard facts of her own experience, rose within her, hot and sharp. But she quelled it, reminding herself of her purpose. She was here to shoot, not to engage in ego-driven displays. Marcus, one of Travis's usual sycophants, chuckled, nodding in agreement. "That's right, Trav. It's an art form." His words were laced with an almost desperate eagerness to please, a dynamic that Kat found both predictable and faintly pathetic. She'd seen it play out countless times before, the dance of dominance and subservience, the unspoken hierarchy within these small, insular communities. He's a peacock, she thought, watching Travis preen under the admiring gaze of his followers, strutting his feathers for an audience that doesn't know any better. Bill handed Kat her lane assignment, his expression unchanged. "Lane 5, he mumbled, his eyes flicking towards Travis, then back to Kat. There was a subtle shift in his demeanor, a flicker of something that might have been pity, or perhaps even a hint of warning. He knows, Kat thought, a sudden understanding dawning on her. He sees what's coming. She took the key, her fingers brushing against Bill's. The contact, brief and impersonal, sent a ripple of unease through her. She was used to operating in the shadows, her skills hidden beneath layers of carefully constructed normalcy. The thought of being exposed, of having her past unearthed, stirred a deep-seated anxiety within her. "Enjoy your time here," Bill said, his voice flat, devoid of any real warmth. He turned his attention to the next customer, dismissing Kat with a practiced indifference. Kat walked towards lane 5, her range bag heavy on her shoulder. Travis's voice continued to drone on in the background, his words washing over her like a meaningless wave. She felt his eyes on her back, a palpable weight that made the fine hairs on her neck stand on end. "He's waiting for me to fail," she thought, her grip tightening on the strap of her bag, waiting for the confirmation that he's superior. A slow, steady burn began to spread through her chest, a quiet fire ignited by his condescending gaze. She stopped at her assigned lane, taking a deep, cleansing breath. The familiar scent of gunpowder filled her lungs, grounding her, centering her. "This is my domain," she thought, a quiet confidence settling over her like a second skin. He doesn't know who he's dealing with. She unzipped her bag, revealing the sleek, matte black lines of her custom-built rifle. The metal felt cool and smooth against her palm, a familiar weight that brought a sense of calm and control. The range suddenly felt smaller, the buzzing of the fluorescent lights fading into the background as she focused her attention on the target downrange. The game, she realized, was about to begin. The air hung thick and heavy with the acrid scent of gunpowder, a familiar perfume Kat hadn't inhaled in years. The Sacramento Valley shooting range echoed with the staccato barks of handguns and the deeper thrum of rifles, a symphony of controlled violence. Kat found a relatively isolated lane towards the back, away from the boisterous cluster of men surrounding Travis Sullivan. She preferred the quiet, the space to focus, to reconnect with a part of herself she'd kept carefully locked away. The worn, wooden bench felt cool against her back as she sat, the weight of the rented rifle case a comforting presence beside her. A phantom ache pulsed in her shoulder, a ghostly reminder of the weapon she used to carry, heavier, more powerful. She pushed the thought away, focusing on the task at hand. Methodically, she unpacked the equipment, the metallic click of the latches a sharp counterpoint to the rhythmic explosions echoing down the range. She ran a practiced hand over the cool steel of the barrel, checking the sights, the action, each movement precise, economical. She wasn't here to impress anyone, just to shoot, to feel the familiar kick against her shoulder, the controlled release, the satisfying ping of metal on metal. "Need some help with that, sweetheart?" A voice drawled, laced with condescending amusement. Kat's fingers tightened momentarily on the rifle stock. She recognized the voice. Marcus, one of Travis's entourage. She didn't bother looking up. "I'm fine. You sure? Looks complicated. Might be too much for those delicate hands." He chuckled, the sound grating on her nerves. "Ignore him. He's looking for a reaction. Don't give him one." Her internal monologue was a steady stream of self-control. She fitted the magazine, her movements deliberately slow, almost languid. She could feel Marcus's gaze on her, heavy with expectation. Let him wait. He'll get bored eventually. Travis strolled over, his posture radiating an almost comical arrogance. He stopped a few feet away, observing her with a thinly veiled smirk. "You sure you're in the right place? The basic safety course meets on Saturdays." Kat finally looked up, her gaze level, unwavering. "I'm exactly where I need to be." The subtle shift in the atmosphere was almost palpable. Bill, the range officer, a man whose face seemed etched with the stories of 1,000 spent cartridges, glanced up from his paperwork, his weary eyes assessing the situation. Travis chuckled, a sound devoid of humor. "I'm all for women learning to protect themselves," he began, his tone dripping with condescension. "But this is the advanced class. Might be a bit much for," he trailed off, gesturing vaguely in her direction. Kat's grip on the rifle tightened further. A flicker of something cold, something sharp, ignited in her gut. Patronizing prick. She forced herself to breathe, to maintain the carefully constructed facade of indifference. Years of training had taught her the value of control, of masking her emotions. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her rise to the bait. "Don't you worry about me," she said, her voice calm, almost too quiet. Travis exchanged a look with Marcus, a silent communication of shared amusement. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Look, I appreciate the enthusiasm, but this isn't some Hollywood movie. This is real life. People get hurt." The faintest hint of a smile played at the corners of Kat's lips. Hurt? He has no idea. The years melted away. She was no longer Catherine Torres, the quiet woman blending into the background. She was Ghost, the designated marksman, her senses sharpened, her body humming with a familiar, almost forgotten energy. "I'm aware of the risks," she said, her voice still soft, but with an underlying steel that Travis seemed to finally register. He raised an eyebrow, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. "Right. Well, good luck." He turned to leave, shaking his head, dismissing her as just another overconfident amateur. Marcus lingered, a smirk still plastered on his face. "Don't say we didn't warn you," he said, before following Travis back to their group. Kat took a deep breath, the scent of gunpowder strangely comforting. She adjusted her grip on the rifle, feeling the familiar weight settle against her shoulder. The targets, stark white against the earthen berm, seemed to beckon. She sighted down the barrel, her breath slowing, her heart rate steadying. The world narrowed to the black circle at the center of the target. Everything else faded away. The taunts, the condescending smiles, the years of silence. All that remained was the rifle, the target, and the muscle memory honed over countless hours of practice. "Let's see what you've got, sweetheart." The first shot echoed through the range, sharp and clean. The target remained untouched. Travis and his crew erupted in laughter. Kat didn't flinch. She hadn't expected to hit the target on the first shot. She was adjusting for wind, for distance, for the subtle imperfections of the rented rifle. This was a dance, a delicate interplay of skill and instinct. The second shot followed quickly after the first. This time, the target jerked, a small hole appearing just outside the center circle. The laughter subsided. The third, fourth, and fifth shots followed in rapid succession. Each one found its mark, clustering tightly around the bullseye. Silence descended upon the range, broken only by the faint whisper of the wind. Travis and his crew stared in stunned disbelief. Bill, the range officer, slowly lowered his binoculars, a look of grudging admiration on his weathered face. Kat lowered the rifle, her expression unchanged. She ejected the spent magazine, the metallic click echoing in the sudden quiet. She met Travis's gaze, her eyes cool, unwavering. The faintest hint of a smile played at the corners of her lips. It wasn't a smile of triumph, but of quiet satisfaction. She hadn't come here to prove anything to anyone. But sometimes a little demonstration was necessary. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Finally, Marcus broke the spell, his voice hushed with awe. "Damn." Travis remained silent, his face a mask of stunned disbelief. The arrogance had vanished, replaced by something akin to respect, perhaps even a touch of fear. He'd underestimated her. Badly. Kat began to repack her equipment, her movements precise and methodical, as if the last few minutes hadn't happened. The quiet confidence she'd carried with her had solidified into something more, something harder, something that radiated outward like a silent warning. She wasn't just Catherine Torres, the quiet woman. She was something more, and she was perfectly content to let them wonder what that something was. The air hung thick and heavy, a metallic tang mingling with the acrid scent of burnt gunpowder. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sterile glare on the Sacramento shooting range. Kat adjusted the ear protection, the foam pressing against the cartilage of her ears, momentarily muffling the world. She felt a familiar calm descend, a quiet centering amidst the controlled chaos. Her gaze drifted across the other participants in the advanced marksmanship class, their faces a mix of anticipation and nervous excitement. Bill, the range officer, a man etched with the weariness of countless spent cartridges and echoing gunshots, stood by with the detached air of someone who'd seen it all. Kat ran a hand along the cool metal of her borrowed Glock 17, the familiar weight grounding her. It wasn't her preferred weapon, but it would do. Travis Sullivan, a man built like a linebacker and radiating an aura of self-assuredness, stepped forward. He held his custom-built 1911 like an extension of his own arm, the polished steel glinting under the fluorescent lights. "All right, folks," he announced, his voice booming across the range, a practice performance. "Let's see what we can do with this little beauty." Kat watched him, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. Showman, she thought, the word a dry taste on her tongue. She'd seen his type before. Loud, flashy, all bluster and little substance. But she held her judgment in check. Experience had taught her the danger of underestimation. Travis positioned himself, his stance textbook perfect, a studied display of expertise. He took a deep breath, exhaled slowly, and squeezed the trigger. The report echoed through the range, sharp and decisive. A perfect bullseye. A ripple of impressed murmurs went through the small group. Marcus, a younger man who seemed permanently attached to Travis's side, let out a whoop of approval. "Damn, Travis. That's how it's done." Travis turned, a smug grin playing on his lips. He met Kat's gaze. "Ma'am," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "If you'd step over here, I'll show you the fundamentals." Kat felt a prickle of irritation, a phantom sensation of her old life, the life she'd meticulously buried. She'd come here for quiet practice, not a performance. "I appreciate the concern," she replied, her voice level, betraying none of the simmering annoyance she felt. "But I think I'll manage." Travis's grin widened, revealing a flash of white teeth. "Oh, you'll manage," he echoed, the word laced with mockery. He glanced at Marcus and the others, a silent invitation to join in the amusement. A few snickers rippled through the group. Bill, the range officer, merely sighed, a sound that spoke volumes of similar encounters. Kat's internal monologue turned cold, a steel door slamming shut on any lingering patience. "Manage," she repeated to herself, the word a spark igniting a long-dormant fire. She'd show him manage. Travis, basking in the attention, gestured towards a more challenging target, a smaller silhouette placed at a longer distance. "Tell you what," he said, his voice laced with a false generosity. "Hit that, and I'll buy you a beer." He knew she wouldn't. It was a calculated move, designed to further solidify his position as the alpha of the range, and to put this quiet, unassuming woman in her place. He saw her as an easy target, a lamb led to the slaughter. Marcus chimed in, a sycophantic grin on his face. "Yeah, lady, what do you say? Think you can handle it?" He pulled out a $20 bill. "I'm putting 20 on Travis." Another man, emboldened by Marcus's bravado, followed suit. 50, says she misses by a mile. The air crackled with a strange mix of anticipation and derision. Kat felt their gazes on her, weighing her, judging her. She registered their bets with a detached amusement. They were so sure of themselves, so confident in their assumptions. It was almost endearing. Kat took a deep breath, the scent of gunpowder suddenly sharp in her nostrils. She stepped forward, her movements deliberate, almost languid. She picked up her Glock, her fingers wrapping around the grip with a practiced ease that belied her earlier hesitancy. The weight of the weapon felt comforting, an old friend in her hand. The years melted away, the range fading into the background, replaced by the ghost of other ranges, other targets, other stakes. Her heart beat with a steady rhythm, a drumbeat against the silence in her mind. She lined up the sights, the small silhouette a distant blur in her vision. She exhaled slowly, a long, controlled breath, emptying her lungs of everything but focus. The world narrowed to the front sight, the target, and the trigger. The report of the Glock was surprisingly muted, almost lost in the echoing space of the range. A beat of silence hung in the air, thick and heavy. Then, the distant ping of metal on metal. Travis's smug grin faltered. Marcus's jaw dropped. Bill, the range officer, straightened, a flicker of surprise in his normally impassive eyes. Kat lowered her weapon, the faintest hint of a smile playing on her lips. She met Travis's stunned gaze, her own eyes holding a wealth of unspoken words. The silence stretched, broken only by the hum of the fluorescent lights and the distant ringing in their ears. "Beginner's luck," Travis finally muttered, the words barely audible, his voice devoid of its earlier bravado. He felt a strange disquiet settle in his gut, a sensation he couldn't quite place. It wasn't just the lost bet or the bruised ego. It was something deeper, an unsettling realization that he'd misjudged something fundamental. He looked at Kat, really looked at her for the first time, and saw not the meek, middle-aged woman he'd assumed her to be, but something else entirely, something sharp and dangerous, something he couldn't quite comprehend. Kat holstered her weapon, the click echoing in the sudden stillness. "Perhaps," she said, her voice soft, but carrying an undeniable weight. She turned and walked away, leaving Travis and the others standing in stunned silence. The metallic tang of gunpowder hung in the air, a silent testament to the lesson they'd just learned. Never judge a book by its cover, especially when the cover conceals a steel spine and a lifetime of experience. The acrid scent of gunpowder hung heavy in the air, clinging to the back of Kat's throat like a bitter memory. The rhythmic crack of gunfire, a sound so familiar it was almost a part of her heartbeat, punctuated the otherwise oppressive silence. She adjusted the ear protection, the foam pressing against her temples, a physical barrier against the world outside, a world that, for this brief period, consisted only of the target 50 yards downrange and the weight of the rifle in her hands. Travis's initial condescending remarks, a buzzing irritation at the periphery of her awareness, had faded into the background noise. He wouldn't be so quick to dismiss her now. She squeezed the trigger, the recoil a familiar jolt against her shoulder, a small price to pay for the satisfaction of seeing another hole appear in the center mass of the target. Not a perfect bullseye, but close enough. Close enough to silence the sneering laughter she'd heard just moments ago. "Not bad." Travis's voice, stripped of its earlier mockery, drifted towards her. "Little high and to the right, but you're on paper." Kat didn't acknowledge him. Her focus remained fixed on the target, her breathing slow and controlled, each inhale and exhale measured, deliberate. She wasn't here for conversation. She was here to reacquaint herself with the feel of steel and lead, to rediscover the rhythm of controlled breathing and precise movements, a rhythm that had once been as natural as her own pulse. Travis's opinion, his approval or disapproval, meant nothing. She cycled the bolt, ejecting the spent casing, its metallic clang echoing briefly before being swallowed by the ambient noise of the range. Her fingers danced over the rifle, adjusting the sights with a practiced ease born of years of experience, years she had tried to bury, to leave behind in a different life. But some things she was realizing couldn't be left behind. They were woven into the fabric of her being, a part of her she could never truly escape. Travis shifted beside her, his presence a palpable weight in the air. She could feel his eyes on her, assessing, reevaluating. The amusement he'd displayed earlier had been replaced by something else, something akin to cautious curiosity, tinged with a flicker of unease. Good. Let him be uneasy. Let him question his assumptions. Her next shot landed closer to the bullseye, a satisfying thud echoing from the distant target. The silence that followed felt heavier, charged with unspoken tension. Marcus, one of Travis's entourage, let out a low whistle, the sound laced with surprise. "Damn, lady," he muttered, shaking his head. "You're improving already." Kat allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile. Improvement? This wasn't improvement. This was simply shaking off the rust, rediscovering the muscle memory that had lain dormant for so long. She hadn't even begun to show them what she was capable of. Bill, the range officer, a man whose face was etched with the weariness of countless hours spent observing the human drama unfold on the firing line, ambled over, his gaze lingering on Kat's target. He'd initially dismissed her with a cursory glance. Another middle-aged woman, trying her hand at something she clearly wasn't cut out for. Now, his eyes held a flicker of respect, a grudging acknowledgement of her unexpected skill. He nodded curtly, a silent affirmation that spoke volumes. Kat ignored the subtle shift in the atmosphere, the palpable change in the way the men around her were perceiving her. Their opinions were irrelevant. What mattered was the feel of the rifle in her hands, the steady beat of her heart, the controlled release of her breath as she squeezed the trigger. This was her sanctuary, a place where she could shed the pretense of normalcy, the carefully constructed facade she presented to the world. Here she could be herself, the person she had once been, the person she still was beneath the surface. She fired again and again, each shot landing closer to the center of the target, a tight cluster of holes forming a deadly constellation around the bullseye. The air crackled with the energy of her focus, the intensity of her concentration. The world around her narrowed, shrinking down to the sights of the rifle, the target, and the steady rhythm of her breath. Travis cleared his throat, the sound echoing unnaturally loud in the sudden stillness that had descended upon the group. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again, as if unsure what words he could possibly use to bridge the chasm that had opened between them. He had underestimated her, dismissed her as just another amateur. Now, he was witnessing a level of skill that far surpassed his own, a quiet mastery that spoke of years of training, of experience forged in the crucible of real-world situations. Kat felt a flicker of satisfaction, a small, cold ember glowing in the depths of her being. Not pride, not exactly. More like a quiet vindication. She didn't need their approval, their admiration. She had never sought it. But it was a small comfort to know that beneath the surface, beneath the carefully constructed facade of ordinariness, the steel remained. She was still the same person she had always been, and that, she realized, was enough. The silence stretched, broken only by the distant hum of the ventilation system and the faint metallic scent of gunpowder. The power dynamic had shifted, subtly, irrevocably. The lesson, delivered without a single word, hung heavy in the air. The air hung thick and heavy with the smell of gunpowder and burnt metal. The rhythmic crack of gunfire echoed across the Sacramento Valley Shooting Center, a staccato percussion against the backdrop of distant traffic hum. Catherine Kat Torres adjusted the ear protection, the foam pressing against her ears, muting the world to a manageable thrum. She felt the familiar, almost comforting weight of the rifle nestled against her shoulder. The M16 wasn't her usual weapon of choice, but the heft, the balance, it spoke a language she understood. She'd handled worse, felt the kick of far more powerful instruments of destruction. This was manageable, almost relaxing if she let herself think about it that way, which she didn't. Relaxing was dangerous. Complacency was a killer. Travis Sullivan, all puffed chest and swagger, planted himself beside her, his own rifle gleaming obscenely under the fluorescent lights. He'd been holding court all morning, dispensing unsolicited advice and veiled insults directed at Kat, a quiet woman who kept to herself, a woman he'd clearly dismissed as another clueless newbie. Kat watched him, a faint flicker of amusement playing in the depths of her cool gray eyes. She'd seen his type before. Loud, boisterous, desperate to prove something. The world was full of them. So, Travis drawled, his voice tight with forced casualness, Think you can handle something a little more challenging? He gestured towards the range officer, a wizened man named Bill, who looked on with the weary resignation of someone who'd seen this performance countless times. Bill sighed, almost inaudibly, and swapped out the standard target for a smaller, metallic disc placed further downrange. 75 yards, he announced, his voice raspy and devoid of enthusiasm. Kat barely registered his words. 75 yards. Child's play. She'd taken shots at twice the distance, under far less ideal circumstances. Her heart beat steadily, a quiet drum against the backdrop of the range's chaotic symphony. She felt a strange calmness descend, a familiar focus sharpening her senses. The years melted away, the Sacramento Valley transformed into another landscape entirely harsh and unforgiving. The memory, though unwanted, surfaced with the icy clarity of a glacial stream. She pushed it down, burying it under layers of practice control. This wasn't then. This was now. This was a shooting range, a game. Travis adjusted his stance, puffed out his chest, and took aim. The shot rang out, followed by the clang of metal on metal. A hit, but barely. He let out a whoop of triumph, disproportionate to the effort it had clearly taken him. That's why this is advanced marksmanship, he announced, turning to Kat with a smirk. Everything's got to be perfect. Breath control, stance, trigger squeeze. He demonstrated each point with exaggerated movements, as if she'd never held a rifle before. Kat's lips twitched almost imperceptibly. One shot, Travis declared, his voice ringing with bravado, then turning his attention to the even smaller target Bill had now set up, an almost insignificant speck at 100 yards. 100 yards. Still a playground. The wind, a subtle whisper against her cheek, became a tangible force, a variable to calculate, a factor to consider. Her mind worked swiftly and silently, processing the information. Distance, wind speed, trajectory. The equations flowed through her, instinctive and precise. And when I hit it, Kat murmured, her voice soft but steady, "You'll owe me a beer." The words hung in the air, a quiet challenge against Travis's booming pronouncements. He laughed, a short, sharp bark of disbelief. "You? Hit that? Lady, you haven't even," he trailed off, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face as he finally registered the unwavering calm in her eyes, the quiet confidence that radiated from her stillness. Marcus, one of Travis's usual entourage, snickered. "She's got more chance of hitting the moon," he muttered, earning a sharp look from Bill. Kat ignored them both. She raised the rifle, the familiar weight settling into her shoulder like an old friend. The world narrowed, shrinking down to the black circle at the end of the barrel. The scent of gunpowder filled her nostrils, not unpleasant, a reminder of a life she'd tried to leave behind. The range faded, the mocking laughter, the condescending stares, all of it dissolved into the white noise of the moment. There was only her, the rifle, and the target. Her breath slowed, becoming shallow and even. The world held its breath. Time seemed to stretch, distorting and warping around her. The pressure on the trigger was infinitesimal, a feather's touch. The shot cracked, sharp and clean. A moment of silence hung in the air, thick and pregnant with anticipation. Then, the faintest ping echoed back from the far end of the range. The metal target, a tiny speck in the distance, swung wildly. A direct hit. Travis stared, his mouth agape, the bravado wiped clean from his face. Marcus's jaw dropped. Even Bill, the seasoned range officer, looked at Kat with a newfound respect. The silence stretched, broken only by the distant hum of traffic, the whispers of the wind, and the quiet thud of Kat's heart, still beating steadily, still calm. The rifle lowered, almost reluctantly, back to her side. The world flooded back, the sounds and smells of the range returning with a rush. Kat met Travis's stunned gaze, her expression unreadable. "A beer," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Sounds good." The faintest hint of a smile played at the corner of her lips, a flicker of amusement in the depths of her cool gray eyes. The game was over, and she had won. The acrid scent of gunpowder hung heavy in the air, a familiar perfume Kat hadn't inhaled in years. It prickled her nostrils, not unpleasantly, a phantom limb of memory twitching back to life. The Sacramento sun beat down on the concrete firing line, radiating heat that shimmered off the metal targets in the distance. She adjusted her grip on the borrowed rifle, its weight strangely comforting, a solid presence in a world that had felt increasingly intangible. Travis, his posture radiating a cocky arrogance, finished his round, his shots scattering around the center of the target. He glanced sideways at Kat, a smirk playing on his lips. His buddies, Marcus included, mirrored his smugness. Kat felt their eyes on her, a tangible weight of expectation laced with disdain. Let them think what they want, she thought, her inner voice a calm counterpoint to the rising tension. It's not their approval I'm seeking. Bill, the range officer, ambled over, his face creased with a perpetual weariness. Your turn, ma'am, he said, his voice flat, devoid of any expectation. Kat nodded, her gaze fixed on the distant target. The metal gleamed under the harsh sun, a small, unforgiving point in the vastness of the range. She took a deep breath, exhaling slowly, her body falling into a familiar rhythm. Years melted away, muscle memory taking over, her stance shifting subtly, aligning her body with the rifle as if they were extensions of each other. The world narrowed, all distractions fading into the periphery. There's only the target, the rifle, and the steady beat of her heart. One shot. The crack of the rifle echoed across the range, sharper, cleaner than the previous shots. A moment of suspended animation, the air thick with anticipation. Then, the distant ping of metal on metal, a clear, sharp sound that cut through the silence. Travis's laughter died in his throat, his smirk dissolving into an expression of bewildered disbelief. Marcus's jaw dropped, his eyes widening in surprise. Bill, the seasoned range officer, stopped chewing on his toothpick, his weary eyes sharpening with a flicker of interest. A ripple of murmurs spread through the small group of onlookers. Holy! Someone breathed, the word hanging unfinished in the air. Lucky shot, Travis muttered, his voice strained, the conviction absent. Kat remained still, her gaze fixed on the target, her expression unchanged. Inside, the quiet satisfaction bloomed, a small, private victory. Not luck, she thought, the words a silent affirmation. Skill. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken questions. Bill finally broke it, his voice rough but tinged with a newfound respect. Care to try that again, ma'am? Kat lowered the rifle, her movements precise and deliberate. No need, she said, her voice soft but firm. The group stared at her, their earlier amusement replaced by a stunned silence. The power dynamic, so clearly defined just moments ago, had shifted subtly but irrevocably. Travis cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet. Beginner's luck, he insisted, his voice tight with forced confidence. Marcus, usually quick to echo Travis's sentiments, remained silent, his gaze fixed on Kat. He saw something now, something that had been invisible before, a quiet strength that resonated beneath her unassuming exterior. Kat met Travis's gaze, her eyes calm, unreadable. She said finally a while back. Her words were simple, almost an understatement, but they hung in the air, heavy with implication. She could feel their curiosity, their sudden, desperate need to understand. The air crackled with unspoken questions. Bill, his curiosity finally overcoming his usual reserve, stepped closer. Somewhat, ma'am. Kat hesitated for a moment, a flicker of something unreadable passing across her face. Then she spoke, her voice low and steady. Designated marksman, she said, the words echoing the sharp crack of her earlier shot. Did 3 tours overseas. She let the sentence trail off, the unspoken details hanging in the air, heavier than any boast. The silence returned, deeper this time, filled with a different kind of awe. Travis's face paled, his earlier arrogance replaced by a dawning realization. Marcus stared at Kat, his eyes wide with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. Bill simply nodded, a slow, respectful gesture. He'd seen enough in his years at the range to recognize the quiet confidence of someone who knew their craft. Kat felt the shift in their perception, the invisible wall of their assumptions crumbling around her. She hadn't meant to reveal her past, hadn't sought their admiration. She came to the range for the quiet solitude of the practice, the familiar comfort of the rifle. But sometimes, she reflected, the world had a way of forcing your hand, of reminding you that appearances could be deceiving. And sometimes, a single shot could speak volumes. The faintest ghost of a smile played on her lips. The Sacramento sun felt warm on her skin, the scent of gunpowder no longer a phantom limb, but a living memory, a testament to a part of herself she thought she had left behind. The acrid smell of gunpowder hung heavy in the air, a metallic tang clinging to the back of Kat's throat. The rhythmic clang of spent brass hitting the concrete floor echoed around the now silent range. She disassembled her Glock 19, the familiar movements soothing in their routine, each click and slide a small act of control in a world that often felt chaotic. Around her, the others remained frozen, still processing the demonstration of her skill. Travis, his face a mixture of disbelief and something akin to shame, stood with his arms crossed, his usual swagger replaced by an awkward stillness. Kat zipped her gun case, the metallic rasp a sharp counterpoint to the quiet hum of the range's ventilation system. She met Bill's gaze, a flicker of respect she hadn't seen before warming his usually tired eyes. He offered a curt nod, a silent acknowledgement of her capabilities. She returned the gesture, a tiny, almost imperceptible upturn of her lips, before turning her attention to the small group that had so readily dismissed her. "You all assumed I was just some suburban mom," she said, her voice quiet but carrying clearly in the sudden stillness. Her internal monologue churned, a mix of weary amusement and a faint, lingering bitterness. It was a familiar dance, this performance of ordinariness. The careful construction of an unremarkable facade. It was a shield, a way to navigate a world that wasn't always kind to those who carried the weight of what she had seen and done. Sometimes, she continued, her gaze sweeping across their stunned faces, it's nice to be underestimated instead of feared. Marcus, his earlier mockery forgotten, looked at her with a newfound awe. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again, the words seemingly catching in his throat. Kat saw a flicker of genuine admiration in his eyes, a stark contrast to the derision he'd displayed earlier. It was a small victory, a fleeting moment of understanding in a world often quick to judge. Travis shifted his weight, the movement stiff and uncomfortable. He ran a hand through his hair, his gaze avoiding hers. Kat could practically feel the weight of his internal struggle, the dissonance between his carefully constructed image of himself and the undeniable reality of her skill. She felt a flicker of something akin to pity, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of weary resignation. It was a story she'd seen play out countless times before. The arrogance of assumed superiority crumbling in the face of unexpected competence. "You never know who might walk through that gate," Kat said, her voice soft, almost a whisper, yet carrying the weight of unspoken experiences. The words hung in the air, a subtle challenge, a quiet reminder of the dangers of presumption. She turned to leave, the weight of their stares heavy on her back. As she reached the exit, she paused, her hand resting on the cool metal of the door. She took a deep breath, the scent of gunpowder still clinging to the air, a phantom limb of a life she tried to leave behind. She exhaled slowly, letting the tension bleed out of her. The world outside the range was bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun. The ordinary sounds of traffic, the distant laughter of children, the rustle of leaves in the light breeze, all seemed amplified after the controlled environment of the range. Kat walked towards her car, each step a conscious effort to reconnect with the present, to shed the remnants of the past. Inside the range, silence reigned. The echoes of Kat's shots, of her words, reverberated in the sudden stillness. Travis finally broke the silence, his voice low and laced with a newfound humility. "Damn," he muttered, shaking his head slowly. "Damn." Marcus, still awestruck, could only manage a quiet. She was incredible. He looked at the targets, still riddled with Kat's precise shots, each one a testament to her skill. He could almost feel the phantom vibrations of the gun in his own hands, the power she'd wielded with such quiet confidence. The memory of her calm demeanor, the almost effortless way she'd handled the weapon, imprinted itself on his mind. Bill, leaning against the counter, watched the two men, a knowing look in his eyes. He'd seen countless hotshots come and go, their bravado often exceeding their skill. He'd also seen the quiet ones, the ones who carried their expertise like a hidden weapon, only revealing it when necessary. He learned long ago not to judge a book by its cover, especially at a place like this. "You think she was lying about being a librarian?" Marcus asked, his voice tinged with doubt. Bill chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "Doesn't matter what she does for a living, son. What matters is what she can do." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the range, his eyes lingering on the targets Kat had used. "She could probably outshoot half the guys who come through here with her eyes closed." He sighed, the sound heavy with years of experience. "You learn a thing or two after spending enough time at a place like this." He looked at Travis, his expression unreadable. "Lesson learned, Sullivan." Travis, still grappling with the implications of Kat's display, nodded slowly. "Yeah," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Lesson learned." He felt a strange mix of shame and admiration, a grudging respect for the woman he'd so readily dismissed. The encounter had shaken him, forcing him to confront his own prejudices, his own reliance on appearances. The range slowly returned to life, the sounds of gunfire resuming, the metallic clang of spent brass filling the air once more. But something had shifted, a subtle change in the atmosphere. The casual arrogance that usually permeated the range seemed muted, replaced by a newfound awareness, a quiet understanding that beneath the surface of the ordinary, extraordinary things and extraordinary people could be found. The lesson, though unspoken, hung heavy in the air, a stark reminder that appearances could be deceiving and that true strength often came in the most unexpected packages. The heavy metal door of the Sacramento Valley shooting range clanged shut behind her, the sound swallowed by the dry, crackling heat of the afternoon. Catherine Torres, Kat as she preferred, walked toward her car, the gravel crunching rhythmically under her worn boots. She felt the phantom weight of the M4 against her shoulder, the familiar pressure of the stock, the coolness of the metal against her cheek. It was a sensation she'd carried with her for years, a ghost limb of a life she'd left behind. The echo of the silenced shots still reverberated in her ears, not the sharp crack of Travis's modified rifle, but the dull thud of suppressed fire, of missions under the cover of darkness, of a world she rarely revisited, even in her thoughts. The air in the range had been thick with gunpowder and testosterone, a familiar cocktail that always left her feeling strangely detached, like an observer in a play about her former life. Now, breathing in the dry, dusty air of the parking lot, she felt a quiet sense of relief. The pretense, the downplaying of her skills, the constant need to appear ordinary, it was exhausting. She unlocked her nondescript sedan, a deliberate choice in a world that prized flashy displays of power, and slid behind the wheel. The cool leather against her back was a welcome contrast to the oppressive heat. As she started the engine, a fleeting thought crossed her mind. Perhaps she should have just let him win. Let him keep his fragile ego intact. But the thought vanished as quickly as it came. Some instincts, honed over years of training and survival, were impossible to suppress. Inside the range, the silence that followed Kat's departure was thick with unspoken questions. Travis stood by the firing line, his custom-built rifle hanging loosely in his hand. He stared at the targets, Kat's grouping so tight It looked like a single, ragged hole, a stark contrast to his own spread. He felt a cold knot forming in his stomach, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years, not since his early days in competition, the gnawing uncertainty of facing a superior opponent. He'd spent years cultivating an image, the expert, the top gun, the one to beat. And in a matter of minutes, a woman, someone he'd dismissed as a clueless amateur, had dismantled it piece by piece. He ran a hand over his close-cropped hair, the gesture betraying a nervousness he desperately tried to conceal. He'd felt a thrill, a perverse sense of excitement, as he'd challenged her, confident in his superior skill. Now, that thrill had curdled into something bitter, a taste of humiliation he couldn't swallow. He could feel the weight of Marcus's and Bill's stares, each glance a silent indictment of his arrogance. Marcus, usually quick with a joke or a comment, stood silently beside Travis. His earlier amusement, the shared mockery of Kat's quiet demeanor, had evaporated, replaced by stunned awe. He replayed the scene in his mind, Kat's calm, almost detached movements as she handled the rifle, the effortless precision of her shots. He'd seen skilled shooters before, but this was different. There was an economy of motion, a quiet confidence that spoke of years of experience, of a level of mastery he'd only dreamt of achieving. 12 years military-designated marksman, he finally muttered, the words hanging heavy in the air. We just tried to school a designated marksman. He glanced at Travis, whose face was a mask of barely suppressed anger. Marcus swallowed, a sudden wave of unease washing over him. He'd followed Travis, admired him, even envied him. But in this moment, he saw a crack in the facade, a glimpse of insecurity he hadn't noticed before. Bill, the range officer, leaned against the counter, his weathered face creased in a thoughtful frown. He'd seen countless shooters come and go, witnessed their triumphs and their failures, their bravado and their quiet resignation. He'd initially pegged Kat as another middle-aged hobbyist, someone looking to escape the monotony of everyday life. He'd seen the subtle signs of Travis's condescension, the dismissive flick of his wrist, the barely concealed smirk. He'd felt a flicker of annoyance, a weariness born of witnessing the same predictable display of ego time and again. But as he watched Kat shoot, he'd recognized something familiar in her stance, in the way she held the rifle, in the unwavering focus in her eyes. It was the look of someone who had faced pressure far greater than a friendly competition at a shooting range. She wasn't even trying to show off, he said, his voice low and gravelly, breaking the silence. He looked at Travis, his gaze steady and unwavering. Sometimes, he added, his voice laced with a hint of something that sounded almost like regret, they're the ones with nothing left to prove. Travis finally turned away from the targets, his jaw tight. He walked towards the gun cleaning station, his movements stiff and jerky. He felt a burning shame, a deep, visceral humiliation that he hadn't anticipated. He'd been so focused on proving himself, on maintaining his image, that he'd failed to see what was right in front of him. He'd judged a book by its cover, and in doing so, he'd exposed his own insecurity, his own desperate need for validation. He picked up a cleaning rod, the metal cold and unforgiving against his skin. He started to meticulously clean his rifle, the repetitive motion a small comfort in the swirling chaos of his thoughts. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the parking lot, the Sacramento Valley shooting range slowly emptied. The echo of gunfire faded, replaced by the quiet hum of the ventilation system. The air, still thick with the scent of gunpowder, seemed to hold the weight of the afternoon's events, a silent reminder of the lessons learned, the assumptions challenged, and the quiet power of those who choose to remain unseen. It was a lesson that resonated not just with Travis, but with everyone present that day. A lesson about the deceptive nature of appearances, the hidden depths that lie beneath the surface, and the quiet dignity of those who carry their strength not in boastful displays, but in the quiet confidence of their own experience. The world, they realized, was full of such silent warriors, moving through life unnoticed, their true strength concealed beneath a veil of ordinary. And sometimes, just sometimes, a glimpse behind that veil could be a humbling, even transformative experience.